I interviewed Bob Poland, and he and Chomsky wrote a book called Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal. And Ellsberg actually, I quote him in my piece. He did a review for that book where he says, this is the roadmap to save ourselves. This is the plan. Everyone needs to read this. It's a survival manual for the species. And I wonder, you never look to elites for anything really, but do the billionaires, do they understand that government action is needed? A global Green New Deal is needed. Paulin said, he's like, we've got till 2050 to get to zero global emissions. So do the elites understand that that's needed? And if so, are the Larry Finks of the world putting their weight behind that?
Oh, they understand it's needed. They're not doing what it takes to get there. They've adopted the rhetoric of net zero by 2050. The problem is the concept of net zero is kind of bullshit, because net zero means you can have carbon offsets, you can have various tax schemes, but most importantly, they're relying on carbon capture, not deliberate, regulated, law enforced phasing out of fossil fuel. And if you look at the Biden plan and you look at all the rhetoric around their carbon capture and nuclear power, is a big piece of the plan. But there's no there. Even if carbon capture, and it looks like there are ways to have carbon capture, to suck some carbon out of the air, but nothing at a scale that can accomplish to reach these targets. But they keep talking about it as if there is. Like I was just reading an article today on the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and there's been some studies. They're building a carbon capture operation in Finland or Iceland. I can't remember, one of those two. And it works. The technology works. But the calculation that this guy made after interviewing and talking to a bunch of scientists, that maybe if 80% of carbon reduction comes from phasing out of fossil fuel, the 20% that would still have to be dealt with, maybe that happens through carbon capture. But first of all, only if you first of all deal with the 80%, which means immediate phasing out of fossil fuels, like immediate, meaning like 5-10 years, but like an urgent plan. But even that 20% is a total question mark. It would take billions and billions of dollars, probably trillions, to create enough carbon capture capacity with this process, at least. And even if you did it, it's optimistic to think it might deal with 20%. Now, I don't know if all his numbers are right or wrong, but everything I've read is that in terms of getting to net zero, well, first of all, net zero by 2050 is not enough. That 2050 number only makes any sense at all if you get to 1.5 degrees warming, stabilized at 1.5 by about 2032, 35 in that area. But you don't get there if you don't essentially get there by the end of this decade. So you have to stabilize at 1.5 by the end of this decade to not get to 2 by 2050. Well, we're nowhere near getting to 1.5. But based on this interview and the recent IPCC report, people should understand 1.5 is a disaster. The extreme climate we're seeing now, we're all over the world. We're now at, what is it? We're about 1.3, 1.4. I can't remember the number. We're maybe 1.2 in warming. So we're 2, 3, 4 degrees to get to 1.5, and they're expecting we could do that in a decade. Well, to get to 1.5 is like a doubling of our current extreme weather between now and 1.5. So look at all the forest fires, all the storms, all the flooding, all the heat. We could get close to doubling. 1.5 to 2 is another more than doubling. 2 to 3 is quadrupling. 4 is more than quadrupling. So 4 is most of the southern hemisphere, as I said, is unlivable. So is when I interviewed this climate scientist, I said at 1.5 or 2, what does the American agricultural West look like? I think I asked him at 2 degrees. I said, some people are saying it's a dust bowl at 2. I said, am I exaggerating? He said, no, you're not exaggerating. The other thing that's really scary in this chapter 11 is he talked about unexpected climate events, extreme events, which they can't estimate the risk. There's not enough data. But like one of the examples he gave is the oceans. And I don't know the specifics of this, but the oceans absorb an enormous amount of carbon naturally. And there's a phenomena that's begun, which I believe is part of global warming itself, where some of that capacity is being reduced, and there is the possibility of a kind of tipping point where there'll be a significant drop in an unexpected way of the oceans absorbing carbon. Well, that's one of the examples of. He says if that happens, all bets are off. All their estimates about 1.5 and 2 and how much time we have, it all goes out the window. And there's other such events that are possible. They can't just put a number on it. It's not like they don't think they're not going to happen. They're scientists. They don't have enough data to say it's this percent or that percent. So do the elites know it? Well, they're not stupid. They read the same stuff we read. I think for the majority of the elites, at least so far, they think when it really comes down to it, they have so much wealth, they'll be okay one way or the other. I mean, it's not for nothing that all these rich guys are building spaceships, and they buy land in New Zealand. And, the rich, Rob Johnson, who knows a lot of these rich people, he says denial is very comforting. Yeah, you go about your life. I mean, so do most of us, except if you have millions and millions and billions of dollars, you feel you're immune. Will there be some individual elites that with enough power and influence and get the catastrophic nature of this, that they will have to actually think about their own children and understand that they may for a time be able to mitigate the effects on themselves and their families, but what planet are they planning to live on? I guess we'll see. In some ways, everything about capitalism we know tells us they're not going to. But there's been some examples where they kind of did. I mean, they did deal with acid rain, sort of. I don't know. The jury's out. We'll find out. But if you work backwards from how do we save human civilization, given the weakness of the people's movement, given the weakness, in places where you would have hoped there would be a real breakthrough, like Brazil, you would have thought there could have been a really progressive breakthrough. Even if Lula wins the next election, it's still so chaotic there. You would have thought a place like India by now would have a really revolutionary, progressive, socialist movement of some strength. Instead, you've got an insane Hindu nationalist running the place. So it may take that we're going to get deep into the shit before enough people wake up and take action. And one hopes it's not too late.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's one thing for Larry Fink, and I'm just using him as a mascot, but it's one thing for these elites to say, "Oh, my company's going to do X, Y, Z," but it's another thing for them to actually get political. Like the Koch brothers are highly political, right? So why don't you put your billions of dollars into politics to push for a Green New Deal? Since these people are very intelligent and very well informed, and they understand that it's a serious emergency. So I would expect to see them shift from my company's going to do this to I'm going to get political now, because they're not stupid and they know that we need to get political. We need to have a global Green New Deal.
They're very political, and the Democratic Party is. I mean, Larry Fink has his man close to Biden as an economic advisor. They're very political. They control the corporate Democrats. But like I say, that they'd have to. It has to be the kind of thing that happens during war, where you, like in World War II, they accept it and had no choice. An enormous amount of government intervention to quickly put the country on a war footing. And that's what's needed now. There has to be government intervention like there's a war. It has to be a war to reshape the economy, which means enormous power handed over to the state. But it has to also be a government that isn't completely controlled by the financial sector, because they have their own agenda, and it's like they can't help themselves but just try to make money out of whatever gets done. I mean, I honestly, at this point, don't care. If there was a quote-unquote New Deal, a Green New Deal, not the kind that's been proposed by the progressives, but one that made the financial sector even richer because they built the public out of tons of money, but actually was effective in phasing out fossil fuels. Well, do we have a choice? Like right now, they should nationalize the fossil fuel industry, obviously. And if you have to pay all the shareholders, which is mostly these financial institutions, and say, okay, here's X trillion dollars, go away. We now own the fossil fuel industry. You haven't lost anything, and we're phasing this out. The same thing. Like a simple proposal would be, Bob Pullman's made this. I just talked about this with him in an interview a little while ago. He reckons that you could pay every fossil fuel worker in the United States 3 years of their current wages for $2 billion. I mean, $2 billion isn't lunch money for Jeff Bezos, or never mind BlackRock. So double that. So $4 billion 6 years. Keep going. You can guarantee all the fossil fuel workers they won't lose a dime with a transition to sustainable energy. And not only that, you would electorally so weaken the Republicans in all these fossil fuel states, because they're going to scream, and what fossil fuel worker is going to turn down money to retire? But they're not doing it. Why isn't Biden doing it? Because if you do that, it means you're serious about phasing out fossil fuel, which means you're going to go to war with the fossil fuel companies, who is owned primarily by the financial sector. That's the most obvious thing in the world. But again, this goes back to this kind of underground organizing, because if you organize in states where there's fossil fuel workers and start organizing with this as a demand, yes, transition, but transition with full support and subsidy to fossil fuel workers, I think it has some success. And Poland was talking about in California, the union that represents refinery workers actually is advocating and supporting this proposal, the phasing out the fossil fuel with a just transition. And of course, why should fossil fuel workers bear the brunt of something the whole society has participated in? But it's the conundrum. The logic of capitalism isn't that, except if they do get that their own wealth, their own status, their children are going to be in an unlivable world. Maybe some of them start to get it. I mean, they've got it more now. And you got to, the Biden administration, at least in rhetoric and at least with a little bit of plan and investment, is taking it more seriously. But it's nowhere near what scientists say needs to be done.
Can the federal government just bail out Alberta? Because Alberta's just stupid on climate change, because that's where their bread is buttered. So you just do the same thing with them, just transition, bail them out, and then they won't care, and then you can move forward on climate, right?
Well, yeah, you offer the fossil fuel workers wage subsidies, whatever. It isn't that much money. Of course, the fossil fuel companies will scream blue murder because they've invested so much money in the tar sands. But if you start with subsidizing the workers electorally, it will really weaken the hand of the right wing in Alberta, which are essentially just fronts for the fossil fuel companies. It's clear the writing's on the wall with tar sands. So, but it's the same thing. The Trudeau government, or it won't be any different. Even the NDP, when they were elected in Alberta, wasn't any different. They don't want to take on the fossil fuel companies. They're afraid. But there's no choice. And the best way to start is with the subsidizing of the workers.
I did a piece on climate communication. Do you know who Catherine Hayhoe is? She's a climate communicator. She puts out statistics where she shows that people in America largely agree that global warming is real, largely agree that it's going to harm people in poor countries like in Africa and so on. They agree it's going to harm their kids. They agree it's going to harm plants and animals. But the thing that prevents action is that they don't think that it'll harm themselves. And it's so strange to me, because you have to be a real psycho. I mean, even if you're a psychopath, right? You want your kids to have a good life, So that's crazy to me. You know what I mean?
I think that's changing. I don't know those stats. I don't know how old they are. I think in the last couple of years, that number has really changed. It used to be really alarming how many people answered poll questions the way you said. But I think that in recent events, especially the last year and a half, 2 years, people are being really directly affected. Look at what happened in New York and New Jersey, the wildfires out west. People are getting it, but there isn't enough consciousness about what's really required. And so the fact that the Democrats claim they're doing something and can blame the Republicans for not doing more, in the U.S., it paralyzes the situation so far. In Canada, there's I think in Canada, in the big urban centers outside of maybe British Columbia, I know I'm in Toronto now, and we're having a lovely climate. We're having a great summer. People joke about in 10, 15, 20 years, we'll grow mangoes in Muskoka. It's easy to be in denial in the Canadian urban centers, and what is it, 80% of Canada is urban. Different out west, because the fires have clearly hit people in a way that hasn't happened before. And I guess one change is the extent to which the Conservative Party in this federal election ongoing now is trying to claim they have a climate policy, which for a long time they didn't even have one, really. It's a reflection of Canadian public opinion, not that the Conservatives are serious about doing anything. They're far too tied to Alberta and fossil fuel areas for votes, and as I said before, mouthpieces for the fossil fuel industry. But the Liberals are a heck of a lot better. Um, why there isn't a larger scale climate movement in Canada? I guess it's kind of what you just said. Even if people in polling questions in Canada say, yes, it affects me, it doesn't really yet. Certainly not in, like I say, not in Toronto. It's hot, maybe hotter than usual in the summer, but everybody, most people, a majority of people, I don't know, I'm not even sure it's most, a majority have air conditioning. And the significant numbers of people that can't afford air conditioning are very marginalized and not organized. You don't hear about them. But the media is terrible on the whole in Canada and the US. The amount of time spent on climate crisis is minimal. And very, very little expose about how ineffectual government policy is. So people get fooled very easily by, when a party or government claims they're going to do this and that. It sounds, oh, okay, they're taking it seriously now.
Yeah, it's just, it's incredibly confusing to me why, if you have kids or you care about the future of society, even if you're a psychopath, you should, on the most narrow, self-interested grounds, you should be in panic mode. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think psychopaths do think that way. Psychopaths, I think they're psychopaths because they don't think very far, except about their most immediate impulse and need and logic. And the problem with capitalism is psychopaths rise to the top. Capitalism rewards psychopaths, people with no conscience, people who don't give a damn about society, who are totally focused on money making. At the very most, and this is where I give you something, but it's very narrow, maybe care about the interests of their own family, the way the mafia does. I think Tony Soprano, the mafia mentality, is a pretty good way to understand how much of the capitalist elites think. That everybody's expendable in the entire world. All humans are expendable except maybe their immediate family. But even there, it's within the confines of very narrow money making. And so, there's a kind of logic to a mafia family. But they don't give a damn that the activities of getting millions of people addicted to drugs and the crime and the destruction, the havoc they wreak. The mafia doesn't care about that because they're making money today, and that's somebody else's problem. I think most of the capitalists think that way, and what I mean by most of the capitalists is the people that actually are actively running the system, either whether it's big corporations or in government. There's a lot of sociopaths rise to the top. And they're not out and out psychopaths, it's like they're going to run around individually killing people and such. But they just have accepted the logic of the system that's so internalized. Like the example, I guess, that I always go back to when I hear this kind of question. Tobacco companies who sat and hid the research. They knew tobacco smoking caused cancer. But not only did they hide the research from the public, knowing that tobacco caused cancer, all the executives smoked. Because if you didn't smoke, you didn't rise to the top of the tobacco company. If you wanted to advance your career, you better be a smoker. But they let and encouraged their kids to smoke for the same reason. They let their kids smoke, knowing what they knew. Because they were just embodiments of the corporate culture. You know, Marx has this great line, social consciousness reflects social being. Well, they become the culture of where they work. They become the corporate culture. They used to have this line, you are what you eat. It wasn't right. It's you are how you make your money to eat. That starts to define your consciousness. And, the odd person gets it and quits and breaks away. You get whistleblowers. But on the whole, the inertia, the habit, it's very hard for people to break out of it without an external event that really shakes them. I mean, eventually, the insurance companies had enough of cancer. It was just costing them too much. And governments, especially in even states that had a certain amount of public insurance, but private insurance companies especially, they wanted to stop the amount of smoking going on. It was costing them a fortune. So eventually one sector of the economy started pressuring the tobacco industry. And they had these big lawsuits in the States and so on. And they're still smoking. It hasn't been banned. But when it comes to something as fundamental as what's required to deal with climate, a real restructuring of the economy, the inertia and habit, it's very difficult. And people it's growing. I can't say it hasn't changed. There's a lot more people get it now than did even 5 years ago. But we who have any kind of platform at all have to really focus on what's effective climate action as opposed to what's empty rhetoric. And I'm hoping that people that are, in the trenches organizing, whether it's about, unions or, against police injustice or crimes against indigenous people, like whatever it is, people have to also take up the question of climate and make sure that wherever they're working, wherever they're organizing, whatever, whether it's advocacy or organizing, that the solution to these issues, whether it's climate or even nuclear weapons, they're very similar, which is there has to be a radical restructuring of how the economy is organized. And it can't be as radical as I'd like to see. Obviously, anybody that looks at this would know that some form of democratic socialism is the only real way out of this. It's just too obvious. But the time frame to have a real kind of socialist transformation, whether it's in Canada or the United States. Now, this may not be true in some other countries. It may be possible. There's a breakthrough. Like Bolivia right now, maybe it's going to go that way. Who knows? Maybe something in Brazil might be possible. But in the U.S. and Canada, the elites are so powerful here. I don't see in a time frame that could be 9 or 10 years, if we have that moment, that you're going to have that kind of transformation. But there needs to be this kind of real restructuring of the Canadian economy if we're going to talk Canada, which is so much based on fossil fuel. And so that conversation, it's hard to have because the Canadian media is not very interested. But, the fires in BC, the people could see what happened in New York. Maybe we're getting closer to that moment.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the interview.